Hi Ken, how are you today?
Doing good. Welcome back to Ziti TV, everybody. We got Darius here. He's a cloud engineer at Now Foundry. And what have you been working on, Darius?
Um, a nice, cool module that Andrew created a couple months ago. Ever since he created it, try to work with it and see what's going on and how we can use it, and kind of show it off to people out there to see how it can be used. A couple of use cases for APIs, especially API access
Yeah.
to make them dark and
So
all that.
Andrew
So,
released that module a few weeks ago, and you've been working on some deployment alternatives for that.
yep.
And what does the module do exactly? It's an Nginx module, right?
Yeah, it's an Nginx module. It kind of, I think, replaces a streams. So the kind of like a reverse proxy streams when the Nginx module Nginx process listens on a public IP, and then and the clients connect to it and then forwards to the does hashing and across multiple backends and connects them to the applications that run on the servers on the backend. So he wrote that to replace that reverse proxy where the instead of having an publicly open an endpoint where anybody can hit that, um, with this module you can do the same thing to reach those applications on the back end, but it's not exposed to the public, so you can only access that through OpenCity network and applications if you write anything client applications as well. Yep.
Okay, so this works with Nginx to give you a ZD only way into Nginx, into the a stream proxy,
Right.
right? So this gives you a new way of configuring a proxy listener on the outside of Nginx.
Right. So
Okay.
you can have a proxy kind of listening to a not to the open public, but to Ziti connections, obviously open Ziti network connections and stuff,
Okay.
services and stuff like that. So yeah,
All right. So I see Nginx here in the little yellow box, and we have a server. Is this server on the upstream side of Nginx?
yep, yeah. So
So the
it's cool.
module is talking to the ZD controller, it's talking to the ZD router, it's running inside of Nginx, and it's got
Then has a binding a port which kind of and then Ziti creates that connection from that binding point to the
okay,
logic or to the back end. So
okay.
so
So
it's kind of like
there's no ZD on the upstream side, only
yeah.
on the client side, the viewer of the proxy over on the left here.
Yeah, so the certification is from the client to that module in
Right.
Nginx, and then it basically has a binding port, and that port creates a session to the endpoint, to the downstream endpoint or upstream, depending on the.
I gotcha. Okay. So what is this right here showing us? This is another image from the repo, from the module repo. Same client logic on the ZD side, on the client side, and then it's showing
Yeah,
us that you can have any
multiple
number of
backends.
upstreams.
Right.
Okay, so it's just regular Nginx upstreams, but it's ZD on the proxy side.
Yeah,
Okay,
replaces that logic basically.
so cool. What kind of deployment alternatives did you come up with so far?
So I was because we basically it's the campaign that we have, we're trying to target, securing APIs and stuff like that. So um, here's I have created some things. Let's see if I can share it. share. I think I lost it.
You've been working with a regular off-the-shelf Nginx, adding in the module. Uh-oh, we might have lost you, Dariusz. Still there? All right, we are waiting to be rejoined by Dariusz. Need some Jeopardy music. Or is it me?
Can you hear me?
Yep, you're back.
I don't know. Every time I share or something, I lose connection.
Oh, that's terrible. We need to see what you're doing.
Let me try maybe just a simple one instead of a dash.
I wasn't sure if it was you or me that dropped off.
No, I could hear you all the time. So,
Okay.
yeah.
This time I lost your audio, though. I
Yeah,
couldn't hear you.
Yeah, let me just share the application itself instead of a screen. Let me see. Just application by application. Yeah. What about that? Again.
I do not have your audio, Dariusz. I'm going to send you another conference link so we can try to get your screen share another way. So if you can hear me, then just grab the conference link from Mattermost and be sure to keep your microphone muted over there. You can share your screen with me in Zoom instead of the stream. Hey, now I've got your video back.
Can you hear me now?
I have your audio as well, yeah. Okay, cool. So just keep the conference over there, video and audio turned off, and then share your screen there.
Okay. All right. All right. Okay. All right.
There we go. Now it's working.
Yeah. 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 So I started with this. Basically, it's because basically I think we mostly, if somebody's starting from scratch or green field deployment, they're probably gonna go probably a different route. But if somebody has already existing infrastructure like Nginx and that does the reverse proxy and and front ends, application or APIs, you probably want to start with something like that with this module and stuff like that. So basically, I just deployed my own Nginx server off the shelf in Azure and compiled the module, installed it there, created a few services, and then since I was already had an AKA cluster that I was working with, I was like, well, might as well use that since a lot of customers deploying applications to Kubernetes, I guess. So I know it's probably a common a use case where the control plane doesn't have to be public. So you can deploy these clusters in the cloud as private clusters, so that they don't have public endpoints. So you either have to have some kind of a proxy or some kind of server or Nginx reverse, or maybe some kind of Bastion's host or something to get to the control plane to kind of manage it and deploy applications into it during a deployment cycle and maintenance and all that stuff. So.
All right. There's a whole lot going on there. Let me see if I've understood this correctly. So you've got a cluster, a Kubernetes cluster with an application running inside in a pod, Hello World app.
Mm-hmm.
But you're not actually publishing that service. Your Nginx upstream is the Kubernetes API server,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
Okay.
AP. Yep.
So we can just ignore pod A for now.
Yeah.
Because we're not publishing pod A. We're publishing the Kubernetes API server, so we can use kube control on Windows 10.
Yep. Exactly right. Yep.
But we're going to do that through Nginx. And so normally kube control, when it talks to the Kubernetes API server, it does a certificate check, just like a web browser does against HTTPS to make sure that it's the right domain name as matches the DNS SAN of the cert. So how does Nginx work with that? Does it pass through to the TLS of the API server, or does it terminate TLS when you use this module?
No, it just passes basically the TLS. So we don't check the certificate.
Okay, cool. So just like any other Ziti service, we're always passing through because we're operating at the transport layer.
Right.
So we don't care what the application is. We're just going to transport it to the server.
Exactly right.
Okay. All right. So the red arrows are your Ziti overlay connections, and then the green arrow is regular Nginx upstream talking to the server.
That's right. Yep.
All right.
Yeah. So the red ones are basically Ziti tunnels, and the service goes through them. It's all encrypted and all that. And then from the Nginx, module, it's basically a TLS connection back to the control plane. Proxy connection through a Ziti network, and then the control plane gets it, and they obviously decrypt it and all that stuff through the TLS mechanisms, right? So I started with that, right?
Okay.
This is not that I started with that, and I wrote a guide on our Cloud Ziti side to kind of the steps that I went through, just to plug this in a little bit. So if you go to it's OpenZiti, I'm writing one for OpenZiti, which is going to have a different use case, or not a different use case, but a different point where we access the service, which I will show later, and that's where I have my setup today. So this is what I started, and then we had some discussions about documentations, and you can ask me about when I was doing this, and you're like, well, are you doing something on ingress controller in Kubernetes or what, right? So I wasn't doing that at that time, but that triggered a few thoughts in my mind when you mentioned that. I was like, well, it's Nginx, and there's another point that Nginx is deployed, and it's inside the Kubernetes cluster where you can actually access the data plane applications, right? So this is control plane, and there's a use case on the data plane. So once I finished with that, I started looking into Nginx just to plug in. So we have this on our, I know this is OpenZiti, but for anyone that's interested in Cloud Ziti, we have Net Foundry side, and then we have some cookbooks there, and And one of them is basically Nginx module that I described today, this, right? And that's going to make it into a Cloud Ziti, OpenZiti in a different form. But this is just a plug for that if anybody's interested. But basically this is, so then once after the discussions that we've had, and I was thinking about it, that it makes sense, what you said, and I was like, well, let me try it to see what that would, how that would happen. And obviously you have the, in the server itself, you have access to the server, to the config files, through just SSH, and you can replace the config files much easier than.
Which config file are you talking about?
Nginx. So Nginx has a config file that that you have to modify to like describe a a Ziti deployment. Like you have to, I can show you.
Right. So what's available right now in the cookbook?
And the cookbook for Cloud Ziti is basically this use case, right? Gives you ability to tells you about how to follow the steps, which are fairly simple to compile that module from source. We don't have it yet today. It's that we would deploy releases and stuff like that, but I think
okay, so you got to build the module.
You have to build the module, and then tells you about the details of configuration, which is not that difficult either, very straightforward.
Nginx configuration file configuration or build configuration for the module?
No, just Nginx, how you module, how you change the configs in the module. Yeah. So this is basically
how you write a proxy config for this module.
Yeah, which is all explained kind of in details for specific service, right? So basically just a Ziti block. You obviously anything with Ziti is identity based, so you have to have an identity, otherwise you won't be able to connect to the network. And then the service itself, you describe the service and then what you're trying to reach, basically. Right?
Okay, so this is at the top level of the configuration.
Yeah.
At the same level as a stream or HTTP context.
Yeah.
So this is a new context, a Ziti context in an Nginx configuration. And so does the cookbook solution, I mean the recipe, does that, I saw that you had Nginx running in AKS. Is it an AKS deployment or is it an Nginx ingress modification? No. Or is it like using the ingress controller for Nginx, or is it the regular Nginx without the controller?
Yeah, it's just a server-based. So it's a server-based, cloud server-based deployment, like VM-based in the cloud that you deploy into a virtual network, not onto the cluster itself.
Oh, it's not running in Kubernetes. It's actually separate from Kubernetes. It's just, okay, so this is like a simple case, just a regular Nginx with this module running.
Yep. Right. Okay. Exactly.
And you could use that to front anything. It wouldn't have to be Kubernetes. You would just use that as an example.
Yeah.
Basically,
right.
any server that is otherwise unreachable, you can make it reachable with Ziti.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yep.
All right. Yeah, that's really flexible. I mean, you could even run that in a container and make like a server that's running in another Docker container. You could expose that with Ziti privately.
Yeah. Exactly right. Yep. And that's where it takes us into this, which is kind of moving outside of the cluster, because there's a lot of deployments.
Oh, I see. Yeah, now the cluster's over there to the side.
Yeah. And then this use case is kind of like, okay, the Nginx, like you said, a pod, right, inside a node.
Yeah.
Right. And then it's like, okay, this and perfect scenario is ingress controller, which is deployed and is the purpose of an ingress controller is to proxy the traffic from the outside world to inside world of Kubernetes onto the nodes and the pods, right? So
yeah, so you have to modify the controller to be able to write the Ziti context, because right now it only knows about stream and HTTP context.
Yeah, so that's a challenging part. It's like, because it's not like you can just go in there and, because it has to be kind of deployable and described in some kind of format,
Yeah.
many ways to deploy it. And, people know probably more than I do about this, and, you as well can. But so I've looked at it because there's two things, actually three things, right? Identity has to be passed, which is, we've done that before with our tunnelers, so that's easy, right? Part. Then the config file, so there's like config maps and stuff like that. So and then you have to look at the application, how it's deployed and how you can pass configs into it, because they described it different ways and stuff like that. So you have to be looking at that as well to see how we can, without much thought, right? Because you don't want to reinvent the wheel with this. Because my thought about this was just, okay, there's already deployment, let's say a Helm chart or something that's created by Nginx. We just want to like maybe consume that and somehow work with that and customize it so we can add our configuration, because obviously they don't know anything about Ziti module context, right? They unless you work with them, and they can maybe build it with you, because I've seen some custom modules like OpenTrace and stuff like that. They're already built into it.
Yeah.
And right. So
yeah, this would be a fork of the Ingress Nginx Helm chart, and we would just need to modify the templates so that it knows what to do with like a list of Ziti services and identities. See, the basic job of the Ingress controller is to generate to write the Nginx configuration file and reload it and tell Nginx to load it again. So it reads values from the Helm chart, reads values from input and puts config maps into the cluster. And then the Ingress controller, when it's running, it reads the config maps and generates Nginx configuration files for Nginx and tells it to reload. So we would just need to change that logic a little bit to expect a new values of type Ziti.
Right. Yeah, so along those lines, I guess we can think about it. I kind of did it kind of like a hack, over the last few days, just to quickly, nothing that would be deployed or deployable, but something that can be,
Get it working.
Just to get it working, just to see if it works, right? Just so I just so I was looking at this, as you said, I have many things here, but I was looking at because they have a deployment model, right? A deployment guide where you want to self-build your own.
What
was this? Sorry.
How to get a custom module deployed? Yeah,
how to build one and then put it in your private registry, right? Which is, in my case, it's just a Docker, right? Registry.
So you built a custom image with the module already installed.
Yeah, and I kind of hacked their, because they already have this, right? So I just went into so I cloned their repo, and they have the deployment, right? Which is basically, this is based on, because they tell you go into, clone this repo, check out the tag you want, and then, go into that repo folder, and then you run some commands like even Debian, Alpine image, and stuff like that. So I ran it first time just without anything, and just to see how that would work, and I was able to upload it into my Docker hub account. So I was like, okay, so let me go into look at the details of that file, and then if there's the file, and then I found they created a make file to manage the whole process of building the image. But then they have Docker file in there, which you can choose that uses that they describe the what needs to go into the module into that image.
Is all of that inside the Kubernetes Ingress repo?
Yeah.
So, and that's the source code for the Ingress controller itself, right?
Yeah. That's how they build it themselves. So
is the chart in that same repo?
Yeah, the charts are right there. So the deployments and all. So I was looking at that because I needed to pass the values. So they kind of describe the values that they have, which I kind of looked at it because I was like, well, how do I pass the config? So I was like, it wasn't like, because you have the sets, so you can kind of you have these details that you can these config.
That's your Terraform plan.
Yeah. So yeah, I wanted to keep it so state is managed. I didn't want to manage the state. So Terraform is usually that's what people use out there, right? So I was like, well, let me use that as well. So so there was a build, Docker file, right? So in this Docker file, they describe different images that you want to create, Debian, Alpine, and all that. And then at the end, they have a section where they say it's common section, right? So depending on which image is built, right? So I was like, let me hack that because that sounded like a good idea. So at least to me. So I was like, where do I insert myself? So then I see the common section. I was like, whoa, okay. They add these if it's a plus image, because plus image is their enterprise image, right? So stuff like that. So you can add stuff to it. I'm like, well, let me stuck myself in here. And I was like, well, copy Ziti module because I'm building this locally. So I'm like, I have a local module here. Let's just stuck this into the lib because that's what they do. And then they create it once it's deployed. They create a link from that. I mean, the binaries are called in this folder, but there's a link to where the config reads it from Etsy directory, right? Etsy and Nginx modules, right? So, so basically, I just build it. I told her, okay, just put that module into the build and then build it. So I was able to build it, and and I created an image, and I was like, okay, is that going to work or not? So now I have to test it. Then I kind of play with how do that chart, because I'm like, well, I'm gonna probably use the chart because I can maybe some kind of values or something pass into the, and then I created what's the Terraform Nginx main, right? So I'm pulling the chart here. Right, so this is the Ziti and data DA create the metadata for that Kubernetes secret. So this is the way, and you can describe this in Terraform, right?
Yep, you're talking to your cluster now.
Yeah.
And so the chart that you're going to install is your custom Ingress Nginx chart, but are you going to install that from a file path? It's still pointed at the repository.
The chart is not custom. I pulled that chart from the repo, and then I customized the settings.
Yeah, but you're gonna need. I see. You changed the image repository of the chart to your custom, right? But you're still gonna need to change the chart itself so that it will put your custom values into the Nginx config.
Right. So, I mean, I'm not sure if that's the best way. I hacked it the way I was like looking at these, because there's a controller.custom config map you could pass, but then you have to create that config map. Like I tried to create the config map here, and then upload the config map, and then point that config map once it's during deployment. But then I was looking at these values in the Helm chart when I was going into the details deployment, and they have these. So they create their config file based on these values YAML file, right? Controller, deployment, and all that. So I'm like looking at this, and I see that's why. So this, when I describe this, I think that's what this changes in here in his image file right there. They, instead of using this, they're gonna use that, right? So
that's right.
Then I found this config. I'm like, okay, there's a config. The name of the config map used by Ingress controller, right? So I'm like, well, and there's entries. I'm like, well, okay, so maybe I can. It says customizing Nginx configuration. So I'm like, okay. So I was like, well, let me pass this whole block of text into that values under config. And then obviously there's snippets, and you can input. I'm not sure that's the best way, but I made it work this way for now. But you can pass snippets of config into either the main block of the config file, or HTTP block, or upstream and all that. So obviously this is the main config block. So I think that's the way you describe the main snippets, right? So then I was like, okay, under main snippet, just pass my information that I want to configure the Ziti for, and then this is my service, and this is my bind. And that's how I try to pass that information to the config file, and then once it's deployed, and then you go into, that's how it looks like, right? So if you can see it, I deployed it because Nginx is running, so I don't have to manage the config map outside of this, creating another config map into the store. I let them take my configuration and do that. So then if I go into that, there's a way obviously to exec command to get the config file, right? So is that the one? Yeah. So this is, I'm looking into the pod to see the config file, so which is located in Nginx after deployment, right? So if I click on that, the way, so it's the rest of
the way you wanted.
Yeah, the rest of the config is there, which is theirs. I didn't modify theirs.
Hey, look at that.
That actually
Nice
put it in there. I was like, okay, that should be fine. And then I was like, okay, let's see. And then it seems to be working, right? I haven't really fully tested all different scenarios and stuff like that, but I kind of did a couple like shutdowns and all that and recreations and stuff, and it seems to be working well. I'm sure there's more details, more tests to be done, but it seems like one of the good ways, or a possible way, let's say the best way, but without maybe creating your own chart, right, based on their chart or something, right? I didn't want it to create another chart, because if customers use their charts, we can just provide this snippet of code and say, well, if you use this and that, you might be able to pass Ziti configuration into your already working chart in the field. You just have to modify your
no, that's definitely superior. I didn't imagine that the chart would be so flexible. That's great.
Yeah, I mean, it depends how you write the chart. I guess they wrote it in such a way that you can pass this special extra config. So if they didn't have these values, I guess they describe them into the chart. So they provide the vehicle for people to do that, I guess.
Where is that? What is I see image repository, but what about your config entries part? What is that under? Like where is that in the structure of the values file?
It's under about 73, line 73, which is under, so it's controller, and then the next block is config, under the config.
Controller config.
Yeah, so it's the top level is controller, right? The top level is controller.
Yeah.
And then you have all these options under controller, and one of them is config.
Yeah, I see that.
And then you have entries. And that's where you put like entries. So you can put like entries. Then they have explanation of the entries in their the documentation, but you could just pass like snippets of code, which is the easiest way to do. So you can basically, wherever you wanted to put. So you could just say, okay,
doing that, yeah. In the main config map, it just loops over everything you put under config and writes it into the top level of the Nginx config. Perfect. You found exactly what you needed.
Yeah, I don't know if that's the best way, but that was the simplest way that I found so far, so I'm not sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so once I passed that point, I was able to deploy it, and then you can see, and I obviously have, if you look at my pods, so I have deployed an application behind it, which is Mattermost. We consume that internally over Ziti ourselves. So I was like, well, that's kind of good thing to do, since we already do that local spaces. So, and also, I don't know if you noticed, I'm using kubectl, which is our Zitify version of it. So it's
Yeah,
basically
that's
go
the
over
ZD
Ziti,
fork
yeah,
of
Ziti
kube
fork.
control.
Yeah, with our Zitification on top of it. So you have to have the top level flags have to be those two, otherwise it won't work.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I have a Mattermost behind it, and then I was able to. So this is R, and then I go to Nginx demo, and this is my. And then I have one connected on my.
Oh, cool.
So I have it on my phone too, connected, and this is so this is basically going through OpenZiti right here, Mattermost. I have a console. Oh, you kicked me out already. 'Cause yeah.
Nice. All right,
Um,
so you've got basically a few different workloads that you've published in this way all through the Nginx module running
yeah,
as, and that's with the ingress Nginx chart. You installed the chart
yeah,
using your Terraform plan.
yeah, right.
Cool.
Yeah,
You
it's
you
good.
fed it, you used the regular chart, but you fed in custom values to set up the ZD module.
Yeah, so with Terraform is nice because now it remembers these configs. So now if I want to add another service, I just add another under bind, and I put another bind and run in Terraform. All it does is just adds a bind,
Yeah.
right? Which just keeps the state, which is nice, right? I think I'm, I assume most customers use that because it's just
So it would be, is Mattermost the name of the ZD service that it's supposed
yeah,
to send to that upstream? So
yeah.
you
It's like
need a one-to-one configuration then of ZD
yeah,
service to upstream.
yeah,
But your upstream could be a pool. Like
yeah.
you could have an upstream defined in your Nginx config as a list of servers, and then Nginx would do normal Nginx load balancing
Yeah,
across that upstream.
actually, the that would happen. That would happen if it's the same service. It would happen before it gets there on Ziti side,
Well,
right?
if you
'Cause-
were, yeah, if you had more than one identity
yeah,
binding that's Mattermost service, then it would be load balanced by ZD. But once it arrives in Nginx, if you use the upstream directive to define a list of servers instead of a single IP port, then Nginx would load balance across all the members of that upstream pool.
I would think so. I haven't tested
Yeah,
it, but it's
it
but it's
should.
probably probably a good idea to test it. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely because customers would probably using that. So yeah,
Well, they're
I'll
probably already using Nginx that way, and this just
yeah,
replaces a
the,
private ingress. Instead of
right.
having VPN, you can use ZD.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah,
This is
that's
good
a good.
stuff, man. Nice
That's a good.
work.
That's a good point. Yeah, I'll test that for sure. So just to show, let me see if I can, so you can see. I go to my phone.
Darius is making himself a note.
Yeah. No, it's
Don't forget to test load balancing the upstreams.
yeah, it makes yeah, it's definitely because you wanna see how it works the way customers would use it because it's just that's what they look for. They look for ways not that you can show them all it works on this server, but in my configuration, I want it to work this way. Does it work? Right? So
Yeah.
definitely.
Well, what else do you want to? Do you have any other use cases that you want to talk about?
No, that was the things. Those are the things I just wanted to show if this actually works. Let's see.
Hello from phone. That was earlier today.
Yes, I was testing it, so I wanted to hold because I had the phone.
Yeah.
Uh, it's my thing here. Yeah.
Well, that is a very successful experiment.
Yeah, so yeah, I'm gonna write this up. I have most of the thing written up for Cloud City, and then just gonna in OpenZiti, I'm gonna add Kubernetes instead of having an Azure Nginx. So there are two use cases inside outside of clusters and stuff. So.
Yeah, I think all we need is maybe a repo that, like a fork of Ingress Nginx, that builds that container image.
Yeah.
Or just push it once and see if anybody uses it, and then we can always automate it later if we end up adding more stuff. But I mean, it's really just you know what? We should probably just add it to the module repo, where the modules just automatically build it and then stuff it into the Nginx container image. And that way we can write solution recipes all day long that reference that image.
Yeah, that's the hard part of writing something like that, like a solution, because you have to have the code. Like this code lives in right now in my repo, but I'm going to move it to the cookbook or a Cloud Ziti repo, but that people can reference and get the snippets and all that stuff if they want to. It's going to be all there. That's the challenging part, where we put the code in the snippets and stuff like that. Is it we're putting in the documentation itself?
Well, I mean, the module is for Nginx, so it makes sense to build a container image of Nginx with the module in the module repo. To me,
yeah, I would think.
That just makes it ready to use.
Yeah,
that's a good build job to add. We can talk more about that later.
Okay. Yeah.
But so we covered a standalone Nginx server. We covered Ingress Nginx, the Helm chart from Kubernetes, and they both work. You published a bunch of different things. You published the Kubernetes API server. You published the Mattermost server running in a container, and you were able to access those both with the Ziti Desktop Edge on your computer as well as your phone, and using the Ziti fork of Kube Control.
Yep.
That's good stuff, man.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Darius. Anything else that you wanted to show or talk about?
No, that's it.
All right.
No, cool. Just I hope they start using it, because that's why Anju built it, so can help. At least the brownfield deployments are already deployed, and it's not as easy to just create something new. Right? So this is more of a okay, I want to use zero trust like OpenZiti, but how do I do that if it already says have something deployed? And how do I move that from that into that deployment, and then eventually maybe forego the entire Nginx ingress and just go into straight into Ziti components, like Ziti edge tunnels and stuff like that, or embed it into their applications, right? So
is this what's available right now?
Yep.
And this is one of the use cases that you were showing with the standalone Nginx server?
Yes.
Right? Mm-hmm. And okay, so that's what's available right now, and what's in the pipeline is the Ingress Nginx solution recipe.
Mm-hmm.
All right, cool. Got it. Awesome. Good stuff, Darius. Great work on that. Thank you for joining me, and we'll sign off.
Thank you for hosting. All right. See you guys. Happy
Later
Friday. Bye.